And I was like, well, so where do these particular objects come from? You know, could there be shadow objects? Could there be a shadow world where all these things are coming from? So what we started doing is actually coming up with these diegetic prototypes that are described by Black artists in books. So this is the Afrohorn. Anybody ever read Henry Dumas's May the Circle Be Unbroken? Yeah. So that's what this is. It's the Afrohorn. So there's going to be 3 of them, and if white people hear the sound, they die. You know, it's pretty wild. Have you read that? Okay. All right. The Mchawi is a story about Amiri Baraka, where he has this inventor friend that creates a shoe with a propeller on it that allows people to fly. So we're like, okay, what does that look like, right? The other thing that we get to see is George Charlotte's Black Memorial that turns black people into white people, but not phenotypically, right? Or the pig detector from Amiri Baraka's story, Pig Detector. Or, more recently, this is a personalized view of the megascope, which actually a print press and a colleague discovered. But this is a personalized version. Notice that there's a telescope for the third eye, because you need that, right? So, all right. So back in I think a few months ago, I tweeted just because I was feeling a particular way, like welcome to the Black Spectral Arts movement is happening now. But we're thinking about people who are directly engaged, my colleagues who are awesome, by the way, with really looking at the collaborative effort, various types of disciplines, looking at Black spectral culture from various lenses, but also fusing it with this kind of progressive Black thought, this affirmation through creation, right? So actually, we came up with this manifesto called the Black Spectral Arts Movement Manifesto. A snippet of it you can see at how we get to next. And it's about Afrofuturism 2.0 and the Black Spectral Art Movement. And the entire piece is going to be published in a publication that's going to support the Unveiling Visions catalog. We're working on that right now. So there's some really strong essays and stuff in it as well. And this is something I picked up from Tiffany Barber from the manifesto. What is compelling about Afrofuturism is that it's historical in its gesture back to previous debates about social responsibility, radical politics, and Black artistic production that surged during the Black Arts Movement, or BAM, in the 60s and 70s, but it rearticulates these debates and expands our understandings of Blackness and multidimensionality, the good and the bad, and the respectable and the undesirable. Also, I want to quote my colleague Lisa Yazik, because I think she hits it on the head when she thinks about what she says in her essay on Afrofuturism that looks at the continuum of Afrofuturism. Afrofuturist artists are interested in recovering lost Black histories and thinking about how those histories inform a whole range of Black cultures today. They also want to think about how these histories and cultures might inspire new visions of tomorrow, right? That brings us to, I'm sorry, I'm almost done, I swear to God. Right now, I have the honor with my friend Damien Duffy. It's a lot of work. We are adapting Kindred into a graphic novel. Okay? That's my main project right now, and it's backbreaking. When I tell you it's backbreaking, it's 240 pages. Yeah, I know, right? So this is some of the character designs. This is Dana, actually. Yep. So you can see, and I actually haven't showed, and I'm going to show you that pages from it. Hardly anybody's seen pages from it. We just got her estate has signed off on the images. Of course, Rufus is trying himself. Right. This is the cover. Prologue. Some of the pages from it. When she first travels back and saves Rufus' life. Oh. You're welcome. It's a lot of work for these things. And it's due in May, and so there's a lot of work to be done. We just turned in the breakdowns for it. But what's really interesting about Butler's work, in particular Kindred, I term it, or me and my friend Stanford Carpenter think about that as an ethnogothic space. And so we're thinking about the idea of Afrofuturism not necessarily being large enough to encompass all of our experiences, and some of them are quite traumatic too, effectively traumatic. So we think of the ethnogothic as primarily speculative cultural narratives that actively engage with negatively affected, racialized, and/or intersectionally situated psychological traumas via the traditions of Gothic tropes, such as body horror, the grotesque, the doppelganger, these types of constructions. This is actually a piece I did for something that Isaiah Lavender is co-editing for Obsidian called Scratching at the Dark. It's kind of a visual essay about the ethnogothic. So thinking about these darker spaces that we deal with to get to that Afrofuture. You know what, I don't even have time to really talk about this stuff. These things, but ask me about this stuff later because I know it's scary. I deal with it. You ever read Playing in the Dark by Toni Morrison?
Yeah.
The dark kind of sleeps off me. Somebody has to play in the dark and actually deal with these particular other issues that haunt us. I think the South as a haunted space, other space. So that's what prompted us to come up with Planet Deep South, which starts Wednesday at alma mater, Jackson State University. We're going to be there looking at the South as a whole nother dimension that actually generates a lot of the political thought around Afrofuturism, the idea of affirmation, the idea of radical black transformative thought. So me and my friend Stacy, as Black Kirby, did a series of these promoting Planet Deep South, and also this idea of reclaiming this black imaginary space. So this jumps off at Jackson State from Wednesday to Friday. That's why another reason that I'm down here. Last one I want to mention is the cyber trap. Okay, imagine cyberpunk and trap music in one space. It's a dystopian space. Seriously, it's a dystopian space after a major climate change, and it deals primarily with addressing some of the issues around poverty and around discrimination in the South, but through a kind of dystopian sci-fi lens. It's a space that I'm working on right now. We're introducing it at the at Planet Deep South as well. Last thing I want to talk about, all right. See, Presence of Greatness. This is my first time meeting Susanna. This is Susanna Morris right here. She's Auburn. Her and Dr. Kenitra Brooks have y'all signed the contract yet for New Sons? Signed the contract for New Sons with Ohio State University. It's a new book series that I'm shouting out right now. Black Kirby did the line work for it. But it's called New Sons, Race, Gender, and Sexuality in the Speculative, right? And I didn't have your email address, but I can shout out Kenitra, right? But also, yeah, exactly. So they're going to be looking for manuscripts for this wonderful, wonderful new chapter in all of this work. Thank you for letting me ramble on over this, and I'm going to sit down now and drink my water. Thank you.
All right, exciting. So while my videographer is going to change the camera so we can engage the panel. And if you have questions, go ahead and start coming up to the microphone. But I want to take a moment and give a shout out to a couple folks. Marita Poole, Dr. Marita Poole is the new curator, director for the Clark Atlanta University Center Gallery. She's an alum of Spelman and Emory University. If you haven't seen the Spelman exhibit, it is powerful. Go over to the Spelman galleries and see that artwork on campus as well. I also want to start off with a point of personal privilege, but this will get us discussing where our art and interests germinated. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Theophia Johnson Tate, my mother, who's here, and who was a dancer, a majorette at Clark, on the panel, but her interest in Egypt, in arts, and making me go to dance classes and play the piano, and my dad was a visual artist, so the arts were in my house all the time. So I ask you all, where did your interests start?
Well, like I was saying, with my, I'm interested starting with my mother as well. I think the first thing I really read and seriously was probably Edgar Allan Poe, and other. My mom was a literature major at Alcorn State University, so I was always surrounded by books and images. And I was off in the cut, so to speak, so, literally like the sticks. So I really just had my imagination to kind of feel things. I started drawing at a very early age, reading at a really early age. And I think that has always fueled my interest in the imaginative. A lot of times after we saw, horror movies and talked about stuff that I read, we had really long, protracted conversations about the content. And so I grew up not being afraid of those particular types of narratives, and then started to think about how science fiction and fantasy can be used as tools to talk about social issues and things of that nature fairly early. And then, of course, she introduced me to comics, and it was pretty much a wrap. You know, I started like breaking up her album covers and drawing Thor and Daredevil and all kinds of stuff inside of it. And then, you know, reading like stuff like Mad Magazine, and, you know, and also remember the Warren magazines, like Creepy and Eerie, those old school black and white horror magazines? Yeah, that kind of stuff. I was totally exposed to. And I always loved school and stuff, so then it just kind of conflated into me becoming a graphic designer and a storyteller. So. No. I was, yeah, exactly. Not until later. It's a long story, but yeah. But when I was always encouraged to make work, you know, so in some way. Yeah.
Okay, so I believe that my interest in the arts and academia as well, I like to pair them together, really came out of boredom. Before we moved as a family here to Atlanta when I was much younger, we used to live in Rochester, New York, and if y'all haven't been to Rochester, New York, it's really cold. Then there's Kodak, and that was about all I remember about it. So, yeah. And so for me, it was really out of boredom that I started to take an interest in science fiction and fantasy, and also in art in and of itself. Both my parents were professors. My father actually taught here at Morehouse for a while. And they used to tell me all the time there's a special place reserved in hell for people who bore one another. So I just really took that to heart. So that's where I got my
So I've been doing science fiction literally as long as I can remember. My very first memory in the world is watching Star Trek original series reruns with my parents while eating vegetables out of our organic garden. So I was clearly destined to either be an organic farmer or a science fiction scholar, and we went with the latter. And that had actually never been my plan. I've always loved science fiction. I've always been into it. Always rolled with people who like science fiction. Both my parents are science fiction readers, and they read the hard stuff. Like they weren't just giving me, I don't even know what would be easy science fiction, but they were giving me like Joanna Russ and Sam Delaney when I was like 9, and I'm like, okay. And then after that, like nothing else is fun because it's like the bar is set very high. So when I went to graduate, and I grew up in Detroit, and if that is not a place that's going to make you think about men and women and black and whites trying to work together to build a better future, I don't know what will. So I did that, and then I went to grad school. I studied, I was looking at the impact of science and technology on contemporary forms of literary expression, and I came down to Georgia Tech on a postdoc. I wanted to work with a feminist scholar there, and then I had heard that there was a science fiction studies professor there, and I thought, no way, how do you get that job? I want it. So the year I got down there, they both left, and I got their jobs. And the rest is history.
Questions? The microphone is right there if you want to come on down. I'll keep asking until you all want to ask on your own. I guess what I will start with, we'll go back to you, Lisa, to ask about being a woman and in a very male-dominated science, engineering, technology, in the STEM profession.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. And again, I came out of a liberal arts background where things are much more diverse, let's say. Yeah, when I got to Georgia Tech, we were 20% women at every level from the undergraduate to the faculty. We're up to 35% now, so I think that's a significant improvement. I like it. I like being the underdog. I like a good challenge. And in fact, I would say I was a very bad feminist until I came to Georgia Tech. And then there was no choice but to become a very good feminist and to really start thinking about it and grappling with these issues. And I realized that I'd been in a real space of privilege where I didn't have to deal with these issues that much prior to my work at Georgia Tech. But now I find it's a good place to be. If you can roll with the boys, so to speak, and hold your own and have something interesting to say, people listen, and I'm really grateful for that. So, there are lots of problematic things one can say about Georgia Tech, but I don't need to do that now. But one thing I'll say is they love their science fiction, boy, and that alone trumps everything else. Absolutely. People will ask my colleagues when they teach Shakespeare, why do you do that? No one asks me that at Georgia Tech. They're like, we get it, and we want to know what you read next. So it's a good place to be.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We've got Dr. Poole, Rita Poole.
I actually have two questions, and there's based on two of the presentations, but particularly I want to frame it in terms of thinking about this Black speculative movement and Black science fiction as this space for the imagination or pushing beyond the restrictions or the restrictive ways that we think about the Black experience. And so my first question deals with kind of your discussion of your trip to, what was it called, Saming, or I don't, Ceremony, right? And oftentimes when I come to these conferences or things like this, people generally, when they talk about art spaces or visual art spaces, they tend to think about like alternative spaces rather than institutions. So as someone who is based in a museum and something that's often perceived as a rarefied or kind of separate space, my question is, what do you perceive or what do you think is the role of kind of more traditional institutions in expanding this Black speculative, artistic, visually artistic movement?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I actually think that I work at the archive at Emory in the African American collections, and we have one of the largest collections of African American culture and art in the country. It's really quite large. Not a lot of people come, but it's pretty fun for me. I think it's actually that the work of museums and archives and these places that are to educate and to hold some of this culture, as well as institutions that don't have that moniker, are really central to everything that we're talking about here. And they really have the capacity to do it. Sometimes politics get in the way of that, or all the time. So one of the things that I've tried to do at Emory in order to broaden the space and also to bring people to the archive to learn from the holdings that we have is about a year ago, it was actually a year-long project. I started a Black comic book collection. It's the first collection that we've ever had there. I think we put in something like 500 comics. And in order to get people to see it, there were really three moves to that. The first one was to teach a class on it, where the students would use the archive and use the comic books themselves to learn about Black contributions to that history. So I taught a class on it called Black Comics. And part of their grade, 50% of it, was based on the research they were doing twice a week in the archive. Also wrote a blog on Southern Spaces, which is really a white academic journal, mostly, here in Atlanta. And they were loving it. The public really took to that blog post. And then we did a panel with several comic book artists, including John Jennings. He came here at the Decatur Book Festival. And we brought it out.
For national? That's good. It's a good try. Yes?
Maybe the first A stood for African American.
Okay. Yes?
It was actually an acronym, but now they just turned it into a name.
Okay. Yes, African Americans are referred to as African Americans. Black people are referred to as African Americans today. In 1915, when the association was founded, Black people were referred to as Negro. That's why. So, Carter G. Woodson felt that African Americans, black people, should be represented positively, and all of the accomplishments and all of their achievements worldwide should be acknowledged. So he founded the association with the mission to disseminate information about the true accomplishments of black people. That includes children. One of the ways that he did this was through Negro History Week. Negro History Week is what is now referred to as Black History Month. Negro History Week didn't become a month-long celebration until 1976 under President Gerald Ford. Has anyone ever heard of President Gerald Ford? Yes? Good. Okay. Yes. So Gerald Ford signed in that the Black History Month would be something that should be celebrated nationally and that it should be a light to the world on the accomplishments of black people. How many people have heard of Mary McLeod Bethune before? Where'd you all hear her name?
At school.
Anyone else? At school? Good. Good. Mary McLeod Bethune is also a name I'd like for you all to remember. Mary McLeod Bethune is the first black woman to be, and the first woman to be president of ASALH. So, and she held the presidency longer than any other president in the history of our organization. So, Mary McLeod Bethune took the presidency in 1936, and she created what is now called the Black History Bulletin. Initially, it was called the Negro History Bulletin. But the bulletin was designed so that black children could have access to black history in their schools. So school teachers like your teacher, librarians, people who mentor children at the YMCA, those kinds of people took the Black History Bulletin and they took it to different parts of their community where children were. So you all believe that children should have access to black history? Yes?
Yes.
And you think it should be talked about in a way that you all can understand?
Yes.
So did Mary McLeod Bethune. During her first year of presidency, she addressed an audience on making black history to the capacity of the Negro child. And in doing that, it was a lifestyle. So she was the director of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration's National Youth Organization. And what she did was she got jobs for black people, for young black people. She also was the first woman president of the Association of Teachers that worked closely with ASALH. So how many of you knew that a majority of the work done by ASALH before the 1970s was done by teachers, school teachers, young people? Did you know that? Okay. So there would be no Black History Month had it not been for the association's focus on the importance of young people. And the PowerPoint is just supposed to be pictures going through, and I'm supposed to talk while you all look at them. They don't necessarily have very much to do with what I'm saying at a particular point. Now, Carter G. Woodson, not only was he a community activist, but he was a scholar. He published and he disseminated information. He took his home, his three-story Victorian in Washington, D.C., and he turned it into the headquarters for the association. So he lived on the top story of his three-story home, and he used the other two stories to take books and mail them all over the country so that people could have access to Black history. A lot of folks believe that Carter G. Woodson is the sole founder of ASALH, that he did all the work on his own. That's not true. He had a lot of help from a lot of very, very, very intelligent and active historians. Historians are the center of the Black history movement, in my mind. So the Journal of Negro History was one of the publications of ASALH. Today it's called the Journal of African American History, and it's still active. If you go to Clark Atlanta's library or to Emory University's library, you can get access to the journal, and you can look through it. Does anyone have any questions so far about Black history? Yes.
I wonder why. Why did Carter G. Woodson think everybody should be treated fairly and not like all the other white people?
Okay. The question is, why did Carter G. Woodson believe that Black people should be treated fairly and not unfairly? Is that the question? Okay. Well, Carter G. Woodson knew that Black people were responsible for a lot of the things that made the world function the way that it did. For example, the domestication of cattle. You all know what that means? Has anyone ever been to a farm? What do you see on a farm?
Cows.
Cows. And what do the cows do? They just run around like bulls, like crazy?
Grass and they milk. Give us milk.
They give us milk. Are there chickens on a farm?
Yeah.
Why do we need farms? Yes. Anyone?
So I can produce food and drinks like milk.
Yes. Yes. Okay. In the back.
So we could get all the things that we need, like from eggs, milk, and cheese, and everything that we're something.
Yes. Does anyone know where farms started? Yes.
I think they started
Farms started in Kansas? Yes.
I think they started in the early 1700s.
Farms started in the early 1700s. Those are correct answers. Farms existed in the 1700s, and they also existed in Kansas, and they still do. But the idea of a farm, the idea that we could organize animals in a way that they could produce for us so that we can have food, originated in Africa. And Carter G. Woodson knew that. He traveled to Africa when historians who had never even been to Africa didn't have anything positive to say about it. And he wanted to correct the lies that were put out into the universe. Yes.
You mentioned his mailing out books all over the world from his houses facing his Victorian house. Where was he getting the books from, and was he giving them freely?
Yes. That's a very good question. Thank you. Carter G. Woodson would get books from everyone who had them. So what he did, the Woodson Home office operated as what is referred to as a clearinghouse. A clearinghouse is a sort of a space or an organization where information goes through and experts look at it and they say what they determine whether or not it's true. So he would take historians, early historians, and he would train them at the Woodson Home, and he would have them investigate materials. He would do book reviews. And how many people know what a book review is? A book review is a criticism of a book. Or a book review is how someone feels about whether or not a book is true. So he did book reviews. Now, his materials will be shipped to him from all over the world. Carter G. Woodson taught in the Philippines. During his graduate career, he traveled to various parts of Africa. He studied in Europe, he studied in Paris. So he had an international network of people who helped him get this information and who helped him challenge racism and racial stereotypes about Black people. Now, the association was not only housed in Carter G. Woodson's home, but every ounce of his earnings, with the exception of some of the money that he sent to some of his family members, went into making sure that the operations of the association were carried out. So he got funding from different grants, and he got funding from governments and from different donations from people all over the country. But for the most part, he never had any children, and he never got married because he wanted to spend all of his money on making sure Black history got to people. Did you guys know that the founder of ASALH and the originator of Black History Month gave all of his money over his whole lifetime to create Black History Month? Did you know that? Did you know that his house is still in Washington, D.C., the Woodson home? It's still there. And one of the things that the association is working on right now is getting it to become a historic landmark, if it hasn't already. So you all see ASNLH again? What does the N stand for in ASNLH? Yes? Okay. Negro? Does anyone want to give a shot at what the full acronym stands for? Go ahead.
American Association, Network.
Good try. Yes.
African American Society of American Society of Negro Life History.
Okay. Yes.
African Association.
Thank you. One more, and then I'm going to have the adults try.
American Association Network.
Thank you. Okay. Any of the adults want to give it a shot?
I would say African Society of Negro Life History.
Okay. Yes.
I would say the Association for the Study of African American.
Okay. Thank you. Gentleman in the hat.
American Association for Negro Literature and History.
Okay. Thank you. So ASNLH is the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Now, it's the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History because we're studying all of life and we're studying all of history of black people. Now remember, black people were referred to as Negro in 1915 when the association was founded. Y'all did very good.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
I read a book a long time ago. I thought it was by Carter G. Woodson, 5,000 Years of Prevalence African History. The influx of Arab invasion over Africa and taking over Egypt from the northern tribes from the Nubian dynasty of Egypt. Did he write that book or one of his students wrote that book?
I'm not familiar with the book. I'm not sure if he wrote it, but I can find out for you. And there'll be some historians here.
Okay.
You can talk to them. Now, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History has branches all over the country and all over the world. Did you know that there's a Black Studies organization in Japan? Did you know that? Did you know that the Japanese study African American history? Did you know that there's an association of Black Studies in the Philippines? What about Canada? You knew about Canada? Good, good. Now, Carter G. Woodson wasn't alone. Historians all over the country and all over the world were passionate about what he had to do. How many people have heard of John Henrik Clark? Can someone tell us who John Henrik Clark was or what he represented? Sir?
He's a historian and African studies.
Yes.
Very, very well. Just deep.
Yes, there he is right there. See him not quite in the middle because there's 4 people up there. But he was a supporter of the association. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for coming out. For those of you who saw my son, ASALH, our newborn, his nose was bleeding. I just want you to know that everything is okay. He scratched himself. And also, he's been dancing to the drums. This is his first time around drums, so it's been a good energy. So my name is Moses Massenberg. Tonight, I'm just going to be Moses. I'm named after Harriet Tubman. Not Moses of Exodus, but Harriet Tubman for the Union Army. And I'm the president of the Atlanta branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Before I begin, I want to let you all know that I come bearing gifts in the spirit of Kwanzaa for the children in the room. I have Carter G. Woodson posters. And each young person in the room is going to get one free of charge. So what is ASALH and who is Carter G. Woodson? Who was Carter G. Woodson and what did he do? For those of you who don't know, Black History Month was founded in 1926, inaugurated in 1926 as Negro History Week. In 1915, Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. He founded the association because he was tired of white scholars who had never been to Africa, who had never spoken to Black people in any respectful manner, determining the way that the world saw Black people. He was tired of Africa being referred to as the dark continent, a continent without life, without accomplishments, without achievements. So he sought out to correct white supremacist depictions of Black people in all areas of society. Thus, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Carter G. Woodson devoted his entire life to Black studies as though it was a life and death struggle. He bought a house in Washington, D.C. at 1538 9th Street and turned it into the headquarters for the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. He lived on the 3rd floor, and he used in the attic and used the rest of the house to birth Black History Month, disseminate information, train scholars, train historians, train Black people in a city where people from all over the world constantly visited our nation's capital. During a time when Black people did not have access to libraries and access to encyclopedias, and the Library of Congress did not catalog the existence or the accomplishments of Black people. Carter G. Woodson provided a home for Black intellectual thought that is now the reason that Black history is celebrated all over the world. Now, a lot of people criticize Black History Month as a February celebration because they don't realize that Black people are a mighty people and Black people are all over the world. Wherever there are Black people, there is Black history. Black History Month is celebrated in February in the United States, but Black History Month is celebrated in October in Canada. Black History Month is celebrated in March in different parts of the United Kingdom. Black History Month celebrations are celebrated for every month of the year in different parts of the world. So Black History Month is an annual celebration. When we think of Black people in terms of their accomplishments and them as a united people in the world, then we understand that Black History Month is more than just a month. Thank you all. Now, what I want to talk about is Mary McLeod Bethune. A lot of people don't know that the Association for the Study of African American Life and History is the reason that there is a Black History Month. But Mary McLeod Bethune is one of the former presidents of the association, and she held the longest presidency. She was president of ASALH from 1936 until 1951. Now, for those of you who study history, world history, you know that those years marked the years of the Great Depression. Those were the years after the stock market crashed. Those were the years when everybody was unemployed and people were depressed and we didn't know what we were going to do. But those years affected Black people more than anyone else because of white supremacy and discrimination in employment that existed before the crash of the stock market. But Mary McLeod Bethune took the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History to new levels in spite of the Great Depression. Now, for those of you who do know, Mary McLeod Bethune founded Bethune-Cookman College in 1904 in Florida and institutionalized education of Black people in the state of Florida in a matter of years. But she also served at the federal government level under FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration as the director of the National Youth Association in the Negro Affairs Division. So, I come bearing gifts for children, and I come to depart you with knowledge on the history and the sacrifices that ancestors Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Mary McLeod Bethune made for us as black people. And I want you all to remember that they were born in 1875, both born in 1875. Albert Einstein, which a lot of people know, was also born in the 1870s and 1879. So I want you to remember the 1870s as a period of black awakening, of black power, of black history, of black self-determination. And I want you all to stop thinking of black people as victims, because we all know that black people are a strong people. And I want you to celebrate the history of black people. I want you to encourage young people to celebrate the history of black people. I want you to take black history to prisons, senior citizens' homes, schools, on the streets. I want you to take black history to more than just the classroom, because right now black history is under attack. There are institutional forces that we can see, some that we can't see, that want to do away with the legacies of our ancestors and the accomplishments of our ancestors. And I want you to, like Mary McLeod Bethune asked the association to, I want you to make sure that you make black history understandable to the capacity of black children. So black children can understand black history, and they can repeat the names of our ancestors, and you, when you've all transcended into ancestorhood, for years and years to come. Thank you for listening. Oh, and if your young people don't get the posters, just find me and I'll hand them one.
Presentation is entitled Participant Observer, the Documentary Photography of Jim Alexander. And I want to start us off with a quote from Jim Alexander at Yale University in 1975. You must tell your own story. It is very important to document who you are and the things you do. That is the way you will input into history, historical evolution, and have a voice of interpretation of that history. Jim Alexander was born August 7, 1935 in Walwick, New Jersey, and this year celebrated his 80th birthday. He entered into the Navy at the age of 17 and served from 1952 to 1956, where he obtained his first camera, a Brownie Hawkeye, as a collateral on a gambling debt. But the owner never came back to get his camera. So, as we say, the rest is history. And before I even move on, Jim Alexander is sitting with us. So he's still being that participant observer. So I want you all to know that he's in the room. So I have to make sure I get it right. In 1967, he received a certificate in business management from Rutgers University, and in '68, a degree in commercial photography from the New York Institute of Photography. He's actually on that school's website as a famous alumni. But it was in 1968, while working as a manager at a delivery paper in New Jersey, that Alexander saw these negative images of Dr. Martin Luther King throughout the newspapers upon his assassination. He called the Associated Press, complained to non-sympathetic ears, and thus set out on his own to build a collection of images of his community's impact on politics, art, and culture, what we are calling in this panel the dialectic of political activism. His original 10-year plan to have this project entitled Spirits, Martyrs, Heroes has now covered more than 45 years. Another critical sub-story to Alexander's documentary genius occurred early on in his career. He had a pivotal conversation with another famous photographer, Gordon Parks. In an attempt to do a retrospective exhibition, Parks had difficulty gaining access to his Life magazine work because he was an employee of the magazine. Alexander desired to become a famous print photographer, like parks, but however, on this fateful day, it was sealed that he vowed never to be an employee of anyone. Fast forward 40 years, and over 500,000 images later, the establishment of the Jim Alexander Collection with the mission to permanently preserve the photographic work of Alexander by making it available to the public through sales, media, art exhibitions, publications, and educational activities has become the focus of his work. Emory's Marble African American History Collection, which is now the Stuart Rose Library, excuse me, focuses on 6 primary areas: the civil rights and post-civil rights movement, Black print culture, Blacks in the left, African American literature and the arts, expatriate literature and cultural figures, and African Americans in sports. Marble is the beneficiary of acquiring several of the pieces from his collection in 2014 to supplement their holdings in the archives and in the areas that we're talking about today, the arts, entertainment, and sports. In the area of sports, there were images of Jackie Robinson, Meadowlark Lemon from the Harlem Globetrotters, and Edwin Moses as he practiced at Morehouse for the Olympics. And Edwin Moses' brother is here with us today as well. So we have 2 special figures in the audience with us. In the area of literary arts, he made sure that many women icons were included. And one of his iconic images is the inauguration at Spelman of Janetta Cole, and that image is in the back of the room. And Maury Evans is in this photograph. She's standing in the front row. If you see her, I don't have my pointer, but with the flowers. Yeah. Giovanni and Gwendolyn Brooks. Yes. So again, the purpose of Marble acquiring several of the images in Alexander's collection was to supplement works that they had in their primary collection. As a participant observer, Alexander worked at Yale University in the art and architecture program called BEST, Black Environmental Studies Team. He's also established the Freedom Arts Communications Team, FACT, and this was a group of Black artists that were in New Haven, and they were responsible for suing Turner Broadcasting and having the funds that were acquired create Black radio stations, such as the one here in Atlanta, Georgia, WCOK. So even as a photographer and an activist, he was looking out for others, and we see his hand in the radio industry and communications as well. Alexander moved his family to Atlanta in 1975, shortly after a meeting with Maynard Jackson, the first Black mayor of Atlanta. He was at a political convention in Washington, D.C. His activism continued in Atlanta, working at the office of the Free Southern Cooperative. He was also a volunteer at the Neighborhood Arts Center, the NAC. In 1977, Alexander became the photographer in residence at the Neighborhood Arts Center and was there for more than 10 years, and a collection of these images have been retained by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on Culture and History. And this is the area of my particular research. My forthcoming book, Art for People's Sake, Atlanta's Neighborhood Arts Center, is based on the images from Alexander's collection and the archives and my oral history research. Emory University has in its holdings some of the visual artists that were at the Neighborhood Arts Center. In the back of the room, you'll see Michael Lomax with Romeo Bearden, and he's pointing at some of his images on the wall hanging at the Neighborhood Arts Center. Other images in the Marble collection include Jacob Lawrence, and also there's a group photograph of female artists, Jewel Simons, Elizabeth Catlett, and Lois Mayley Jones. Alexander's career as a documentary photographer next saw a stint as a resident photographer at Clark College between 1984 and 1990, where he documented the merger with Atlanta University under President Thomas Cole to Clark Atlanta University.
In 1988, he opened up a bookstore, First World Bookstores, and he's also has photographs of the Duke Ellington images that are in his collection are in a Smithsonian exhibition called Beyond Category, The Musical Genius of Duke Ellington. Alexander was honored by the city of Atlanta as a master artist chosen by the city's Office of Cultural Affairs with a comprehensive exhibit called Telling Our Story in 1995. And more recently, such exhibitions as Street Signs, Signs of the Time from 2012, and Romere at the Neck, in an exhibit that was mounted in 2014, demonstrated his dialectic of activism and his accomplishments as a photographer. His relationship to these images have been as a participant observer at these marches, the rallies, meetings, and other human rights activities around the country. Alexander's perspective conveys in his photography a dignity of struggle shared by all, politicians, celebrities, business professionals, students, and everyday men, women, and children. In an age where I am not your role model, sports figures such as Charles Barkley, it's refreshing to know that we have conscious activist artists, entertainers, and sports figures.